Hey guys, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm also going to talk about another article that I read today, and this one is actually called The Critical Literacy for Young Citizens, and it is actually based on First Grader Investigates the First Thanksgiving. And this is by Jennifer Hover James and Michelle McVeigh. So, just a brief overview of this article. So basically, it discusses a lot on historical thinking and the significance historical thinking has and how we need to implement it in our classrooms and with our students. And it also talks about this one educator, I believe her name is Mickey, and how she uses historical thinking within her lesson and how she grabs it really just talks about how historical thinking is very important in her classroom and how it can be used within your lesson. And the main reason why they talk about this is because we don't use it enough or people don't find it as significant. And so they kind of discuss on the importance of it. So I'm just going to read like a quick important fact that I found in here that I really thought was worth retouching. So I'm just going to read it real quick. So this is asking why teach historical thinking. So it says, we believe that teaching historical thinking is an important mean of developing effective citizens. Because again, we want our children to be effective, important citizens. These students are able to use their knowledge about the community, nation, and world along with skills of data collecting and analysis, collaborating, decision-making, and problem-solving, which are all the things that we see in this specific lesson. These students are going to tie historical thinking with problem-solving, with analyzing, with data collecting, and knowledge about their community and their history. And these kind of experiences young children have in the primary grades are going to set a stage for the later learning and their participation in the larger world around them. So that's basically that. That's the important quote, I guess you could say, that I took from this article that I just found very significant into the lesson. So what Mickey does is she basically, I guess, technically since it's November, so it's November and Thanksgiving's around the corner, so I know everyone's getting ready to get their turkeys on and grab their cornbread and all their sides, and oh my gosh, it's so close, you guys. Like, I just can feel Thanksgiving around the corner. So this is the perfect article to have and to read, and such a great lesson. Man, kudos to Nikki and to all her helpers. She had a mentor with her. She had a student teacher helper. So not that everyone's going to have like those extra hands in their classroom, but this is just like a good introduction or beginning to tie in with historical thinking with your students. So what Mickey did is she talked about the first Thanksgiving with her first grade class. So she began by asking the children, like, what do you know about the first Thanksgiving, or what would you like to know? So some questions that came about, with the students they were asking, what did the pilgrims eat? Did they have the same things that we ate? What did they dress like? What did they look like? Where did they live? And things like that. And so she kind of used some of those questions that the students had as she thought about her lesson. And she was like, man, this would be a really great way to introduce the historical thinking and have my students be able to use that themselves. But first graders don't see it like that. But as teachers, you see it like that. And so I think that she did that was such a smart thing to do. So I am all for Mickey and her lesson plan. So she ended up, first she created like the lesson objective, and the lesson objective states that students will be able to use multiple sources to answer the central research question, what did the pilgrims eat at the first Thanksgiving feast? So what she ended up doing is, instead of actually answering those questions, she ended up turning that into a lesson, which is something you want to do in your class in the future, which, hello, I will totally do it. before she decided to go really into depth, what she wanted to do was let the students know, first you're going to be paired off into like groups of 6. I have all these other helpers that can help you guys out if you need it. And she was going to provide different resources. So texts like books, other means of resources, but the majority of the thing that she did was, use, children's books. And she ended up showing the children how to research, actually. So she showed them as a class what the table of contents was, where to look for certain things. And then, like I said, they had, other help, like their other teachers and a mentor teacher to kind of help guide them if they needed that. So the students were so eager to know and what they ate. And she said, after we go ahead and we discuss this with our small groups, we're going to regroup as a whole class and then see what we find, see what's all in common, see if there's certain things that they ate that we didn't eat, or things that they ate in the past that we don't eat now, and vice versa. So what she did is split them off into like 3 different groups, I believe. So like 6 per group. And some students decided like, hey, individually we'll, read some stuff and then we'll talk about it together. Some people paired off. And then another group decided to discuss as a whole group and do the whole research together. So those are just all different ways that you can have them kind of research. And then so she ended up also giving them this research chart. On one column was about food, and then the other column was the book. They had to state the book that they found it in. So some of the things on this article, it says that the students found were like fish, geese, cornbread, deer. And then whenever they regrouped as a class, they discussed all the different foods, and then they even tallied off the ones that they saw the most. There was one teeny tiny conflict. One of the students, or I guess a group of students, had put pumpkin and pumpkin pie. So I guess Mickey ended up questioning her students, like, okay, so let's talk about the pumpkin pie. Where did you find the pumpkin pie in the story? Or like, why do you think they ate pumpkin pie? And then another group had said pumpkin. And so one of the students, I guess, had mentioned that, well, maybe they used something else aside from like, refined sugar, because Mickey ended up letting them know there was no refined sugar back then, so how could they have made the pumpkin pie? So a student kind of argued like, well, maybe they used something else, which was a good, that was a good argument to have. And then, she asked the class as a whole, like, would you guys agree that maybe they used something else? And so as a class, they ended up keeping pumpkin pie on there. So, because you just don't know, we weren't from the pilgrimage time. And so they couldn't really ask, obviously, the pilgrims. And the children were so engaged and so intrigued. And the children were surprised that the pilgrims even ate things such as deer and seafood. And because the children investigated so much within this lesson and within their text and their books and all this and that, they were able to understand that the pilgrims lived near the ocean, which is exactly why they were able to eat seafood. And they had to use their own resources. Like the pilgrims had to use just what they had, like, their hunting and their survival skills and the things around them for them to gather their food, like the berries and then the deer, which is why they had deer meat. Like we don't eat deer meat now for Thanksgiving. We eat turkey. We definitely don't eat seafood. At least I don't. So those are just some of the little things that the students had gathered. Like that information was very important. And I just love how they made those connections. Like they just made the connection to what they used, like what they ate back then, and to how we, like what we eat now and how we gather our food now, because then they were able to also discuss that. So the children were it even mentions in here that the children also said that pilgrims did not have ovens to bake stuff or refrigerators to preserve the meat. So they knew that the pilgrims had to eat everything up like right away, because they weren't going to be able to preserve it. So they were very well aware that they didn't have any of that stuff, or any of those items back then. So in conclusion, I just think that this one example is a really good example of how to engage young children in the purposeful inquiry into the past using multiple resources. And our experiences tell us that every young child can make sense of the historical text and in fact enjoy doing so when it's relevant to their lives, and around their question of interest. So I believe strongly that historical thinking is a must, and it needs to be, like I said before, implemented a lot more in the classroom. So that's basically my thoughts, what I saw in the text. I will definitely be using this in the future. That's kind of like my now what, because this is such a great article to have if you don't have it. I don't know how else you could really look it up, but I will definitely be keeping this in the books. And there's also like other like ways to create a lesson, or you can further go into this lesson. This is just kind of the beginning point that Mickey uses to introduce the first Thanksgiving with her students, and how, like I said before, how she ties in historical thinking. But that's all for today, guys. Thank you for watching my channel. Bye-bye.